New Zealand's Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern today announced an additional $3 million as additional funding for Samoa's recovery needs following Cyclone last month. The funding is part of the range of issues discussed by the two Prime Ministers in Apia this morning.
We've had our first formal bilateral discussions this morning, and we cover all the areas of our cooperation with New Zealand as our major partner in development, including climate change and the problems, the challenges that are facing the world today, especially as they impact on our Pacific Islands, Samoa in particular. This being the greatest challenge facing the world, and I thank New Zealand, the Prime Minister, for her first official visit to Samoa. We also covered a wide range of issues that extended from our Treaty of Friendship, as well the seasonal scheme that New Zealand initiated, a great initiative that benefits all our Pacific Islands, not just Samoa, which increased the income of our people that are benefiting from the scheme, and looked also at other areas where the scheme could be extended into. New Zealand has shown that flexibility by expanding the scheme to include construction works, which benefited our tradespeople, not just Samoa, especially in relation to the recovery work in Christchurch, the damage that were sustained during the destructive earthquakes that hit New Zealand. We also talked about other areas of our cooperation, which included immigration. And I have to congratulate the Prime Minister in the wake of Cyclone Cheetah, for her to prevail on this trip, her first official trip, to come and talk to us about our cooperation, as well as Tonga and Cook Islands. And I think I'll stop here, and I'll ask the Prime Minister to speak to you.
Thank you, Prime Minister, and can I thank you again, as I did at the beginning of our meeting, by thanking you for your hospitality as you host a delegation from New Zealand, which I think reflects the strength of our friendship as New Zealand and Samoa. The fact also we have with us in this delegation ministerial colleagues in the areas that you've touched on as being of real significance to Samoa and New Zealand, covering in particular obviously our Minister of Fire and Affairs, our Minister covering climate change issues, but also our Minister for Social Development and Pacific Peoples as well as parliamentary colleagues from other political parties too. New Zealand and Samoa obviously have a unique friendship, and that's why it was so important for us so early on as a new government to travel to Samoa, amongst other Pacific nations, will be travelling to this trip to highlight the importance of that relationship and the value that we place on it as well. As we discussed in our meeting, and you mentioned, New Zealand is a second home for many, and that is a relationship that is very unique. Obviously, New Zealand and Samoa are already working together on issues from education to health to tourism to the private sector. And those are ongoing relationships. But, of course, things are always heightened when we are dealing with issues that are immediate. And Cyclone Gita was one of those immediate heightened issues that we wanted to make sure that we worked alongside you to respond with you, given it affected so heavily, of course, Samoa, Tonga, but also New Zealand in the aftermath as it was downgraded and travelled across the Pacific. An initial contribution obviously was made, but we highlighted at that time that we wanted to make sure that we worked alongside you to meet ongoing needs. And so that's, of course, why we've made a commitment today to an additional contribution of $3 million in upfront funding to the government as they identify, as you identify your additional recovery needs. And we spoke briefly in our meeting. You mentioned the unprecedented landslip that you experienced in Samoa, and just the scale of that you hadn't seen before. The extra geotechnical work that needed to be done, work on infrastructure. So our hope is that as you identify those needs, that additional $3 million will go in some way to helping with the recovery and building resilience in Samoa as well. We did spend a lot of time talking about climate change. We have a dedicated roundtable later, and I thank you for the contribution your government will make to that dialogue as we consider both the fact that obviously Samoa, as you mentioned, on track to meet your commitments. We know we need to do our part, but collectively I think we have a role to play in advocating on behalf of the Pacific together in an international forum as well, so that internationally it's known the impact that climate change will have here in this region. I mentioned briefly, as you did, there's extra areas that we of course work together on. I know that some of the investment in private sector development program has been hugely successful and really made a contribution to an increase in your GDP. And so again, that's an area we want to add additional support. So we've also set aside an additional $6.5 million in support for that private sector development program, with an ambition that money will go particularly to supporting your young people and women who are developing small business opportunities, accessing microfinancing, and so working closely with the Samoan Ministry of Commerce and your development bank to try and enhance that existing cooperation. Given that this region, half of the population could be defined as young people, I think that collectively we both are looking to what we can do domestically to support our young people into employment opportunities, and supporting their business ideas alongside women is one way we can do that. So thank you again, Prime Minister. We have a busy program ahead, but looking forward to what more we can do together, and at a personal level, strengthening our relationship as well. So thank you again for a wonderful start.
The New Zealand Prime Minister's Pacific Reset visit promotes a new strategy that flags a stronger New Zealand Pacific aid policy, as according to Foreign Minister Winston Peters, it is the Pacific where New Zealand mattered and could do the most. So the question was put to Prime Minister Tuila'epa whether there were any risks at all to finance aid to Samoa, with China's increasing influence at the expense of New Zealand and Australia.
I think this is something which many miss out on, and that is the periodical consultations that we have with our donor partners. We have these periodical consultations with India, with the United States, with Japan, and with China. The next meeting of PAM8, this is 8 times that the consultation with Japan will take place, and I have attended all the 8, from 1 to 8. That will take place in May this year. And 2 years ago, we had consultations with India. We had it in Fiji, and then the following year we had it in New Delhi. And we also had 5 years consultations with China. And for China specifically, in answering to your question, President Xi laid out to the 8 countries that included Australia and New Zealand, countries that have foreign relations with China. It did not include those countries that had relations with Taiwan. And it was in that meeting, and all of you people were there, to hear the message from the President of China that they have earmarked for the next 5 years $2 billion US for grants to the Pacific Islands, and $2 billion US for soft loans, short-term loans. And it means it's all transparent. It's all out in the open. And you were all there to listen to these disclosures by China. So what we are following up are undertakings which were done in the open. Nothing was hidden. So I think that should be quite clear. If you refer back 2 years ago to your news, then you will find all those laid out in the open.
Sorry, just to clarify, there are some people who think the growing influence of China is a bad thing. What would you say to those people?
Well, we are only interested in what was promised to us, and we are following up in connection with our own development.
Mani Person of Samoa Media. My question is actually open to both leaders. I know that on your deliberation on the friendship of treaty friendship, did your discussion extend to the court system, especially on the part that every year we do not feel the number?
Yes, we exchange ideas on how to move forward. Certainly, this is a challenge. We are quite aware that what was agreed upon made sense with our people that come to New Zealand, and they should have jobs already earmarked for them. But when they do arrive and there are no jobs, they become dependents of Samoans in New Zealand, and it became a burden for them. So it makes sense that before you come over, you should have a job lined up. And we are asking New Zealand to re-examine that area in an effort to try and meet our quota by considering some aspects of the seasonal scheme where those who are quite productive and are reported upon to be excellent contributors to the New Zealand economy, to consider them for possible inclusion in a quota scheme.
Mm. Yes, and the discussion that we've had obviously is that there are 2 separate schemes here that have served different purposes, as the Prime Minister has mentioned. And what New Zealand's very mindful of is that with the seasonal workers scheme, of course that provides huge benefit both to New Zealand and to Samoa, but being careful to preserve what was the goals of that scheme as well, which was also to enable skills to return back to Samoa as well. And so both of us agree that there is these competing interests of yes, the value of remittances, and yes, the value of having that skills exchange, but also ensuring that there is the retention and return of skills back to Samoa, which is why we've had the two different goals of the quota scheme and the seasonal worker scheme. But we keep having dialogue around both those two different needs, what we can do to meet them. The work we're doing in the construction area is an example of trying to build in some flexibility, particularly with carpenters. Yeah.
I do realize, of course, that immigration issues for any country is a very sensitive issue. And so any moderation in the scheme would impact not just Samoa, but all the countries affected with their people emigrating into New Zealand.
Prime Minister Ardern, Hazard from here in Samoa. Just want to ask a question about tourism.
Yes.
With New Zealand being our main donor partner and tourism being a mainstay of our economy, what are some of the areas that you're looking at with the new government? Your plans short haul and as well as the long term? Is there a chance of increasing funds?
Yes. And tourism, there is no doubt there is huge potential here, and we discussed the potential for tourism, increases in tourism to really boost Samoa's GDP, and so that much is clear. What we'd hope is that things like supporting the establishment of small and medium and micro-sized enterprises can also contribute to your tourism industry and ecosystem as well. So that investment of $6.5 million, I would hope that we'll see a flow-on effect by the number of businesses being set up to support your tourism economy as well. Of course, there are a number of areas where we already work together too, and alongside in the education space to build your tourism workforce, but always looking for opportunities to support what is a growing venture. And in that regard, I hope that New Zealanders in particular continue to be a big part of your tourism here in Samoa, because so close to New Zealand and such a wonderful destination as well.
Just to follow up on the question, I think all the media people here will agree with me, particularly Driva. You will never
Not
have
even
come.
Barbara, just Driva.
You will never have come to Samoa, and this is a very not a subjective, but a very objective analysis of tourism here in the Pacific Islands. You will find this is the most beautiful island in the South Pacific.
Do you agree?
Barbara's
Mr.
biased. So.
Do you agree with the most beautiful?
Oh, well, I have to tell you that I have been here obviously twice before now for holidays. So obviously I think it's a wonderful destination. But you will probably know I have somewhat of a torn alliances as well, because I've been called a daughter of Niue. Please don't take that personally. And anyway, you can be the daughter of many places.